Bé, anem a començar aquesta sessió. Perdoneu pel retard.
This second session, I apologize for the delay. We've been delayed by lunch break. Welcome, all of you. Today we will be talking about what is the economy, which is the economy that we want, benefits, profits versus sustainability. I would also remind you that there is simultaneous interpretation, English, Catalan. Which sort of economy is the economy that we want? I'm going to do a little introduction. In 2025, collaborative economy will be managing 375 million euros. This collective economy is living behind the concept of merely consumer citizens, but consumption is going to be seen and done in a different way. Also, the way of teaching and learning is going to be different, the way of producing, the way we interact with each other, as well as our relationship with money. It's not just about doing business in a more efficient way and about better ways of using the market, which it also is, but it's a change in the paradigm, a new way of seeing economic relationships. This is why collaborative economy is not only about sharing goods, but also about sharing values, ideas, and solutions for a more sustainable future. In my opinion, the ideals of collaborative economy must not be separated from the ideals of social equality, a more egalitarian society with greater ecologic, environmental justice, with a better impact on society. As you know, collaborative economy startups are fostered by social entrepreneurs created for a social goal, not only as an opportunity for business. This is why shared values and social enterprise are common terms in these innovative startups. This is where I wanted to introduce a small reflection on one of my favorite topics, or one of my favorite values in this economy, pro-common economy, which is gender equality. In the sense, we as women have a necessary role if we want this new model to be totally including, as well as pro-common and collaborative. Technological startups recently founded are 3% 3% promoted by women. So it's a paradox that women have always been the main players of informal economy. Women have always intertwined and established informal economic networks. But even so, we have a smaller presence in the formal collaborative economy. Is it because economy has always been profit-based? This is just questions I'm launching for us to debate. Is it why you still consider collaborative network work should be volunteer, non-profit based? According to Janna Henonen, entrepreneurship professor in the University of Turku in Finland, has come up with certain figures and data. On one hand, we know there's a horizontal line where women tend to choose professions within the areas of education and health, which are often in the public sector, with less opportunities for entrepreneurship. However, in the scope of social and collaborative economy, pro-common economy, is offering opportunities for entrepreneurships also in the areas of health and education. We know we've seen initiatives in this respect. The other cause might be the stereotyped image that we might have of technological pro-common collaborative economy. Our gender stereotype image is that it's a male technological collaborative economy will be male, and anything that's different from this will be seen as strange. And we also have the problem of education. Have girls, teenager girls, are not sufficiently motivated to pursue their technological careers. So that might also explain that there are less women professionally dedicated to technological professions. So this was just an introductory reflection on the issue of gender equality. And now I'm going to introduce the speakers that might be speaking about similar things. Are they going to be talking on whether pro-common economies, is it incompatible with profits? Also, the models of financing for pro-common economies. And a few examples will be given. We'll also talk about what cooperativism what role are traditional companies and as well as cooperatives playing in the pro-common collaborative economies. And also we'll be talking about the gender perspective in collaborative economy. For this, we have with us 3 people who will be tackling this subject. In the first place, we'll have Esther Vidal. Esther Vidal graduate in company management, and she's been working in the cooperative sector for 20 years. First of all, in the cooperative Ronda, and in the last years, she's been managing the cooperative Joves, a member of the work cooperatives. She's also in the process of incorporating herself to work with the new Economies Commission of the City Council. So she's about to start working for the City Council as well. She's an expert in cooperatives, and she's going to be talking to us about the principles related with solidarity and social economy and how they can be connected with people from pro-common collaborative economy. Ramon Roca will speak first, to my right. He is graduate in law from the University of Barcelona, but he later became specialized in information technologies. He's co-founder of Wi-Fi.net, that you might have heard of, a citizen initiative for an open access to internet based on pro-common, firstly by cooperation with the Wi-Fi communities, and from 2009 with fiber optic. He's going to be presenting the experience of Wi-Fi.net and its story of success story based on a decentralized system based on a small cooperative network. Finally, we'll be listening to Dimitri Kleiner, the author of Telecommunism Manifesto, and he will be telling us a little bit what that is. He's one of the artists that have contributed to miscommunication technologies, a series of works of art in collaboration with Telecommunism Network, and that will be tackling social relationships implied in new technologies by the creation of platforms that will be working in an unexpected way. Yes, also collaborated in the foundation of the National Debtors Party that he will be telling us about, I hope, and then we'll have a round of questions and answers. I hope it will be very fruitful. Thank you, Elena. Okay, so I'll try to stick to the chronometer. And I will be using the PowerPoint so I can be more concise with my ideas. From the objectives Elena was exposing and mentioning, I'd like to focus on the second one, the connection between collaborative economy and the cooperative social and solidarity economy. As Elena was saying, I've been working in the cooperative world for many years, and in collaborative economy I've been working only recently, but thinking about this goal, this objective, I was thinking about the ambivalence of collaborative economy, which on the one hand makes us think that would have many common values with cooperation, but which on the other hand poses many questions in the world of collaborative economy. And it makes us wonder to which extent do we have common elements. I'll try to bring some elements to the debate. I'd like to start by saying that these common elements between these two economies, and that would be common to both social solidarity economy, depending on the form they acquire. They might be associations, organizations, or projects without a legal form. However, they do share three elements: democratic and participative management, secondly, oriented towards human needs, and finally, commitment with the community. In front of the question to what extent collaborative economy shares these three values, I think we could say that we clearly can say that when the projects are starting from the participation in self-organization and self-production, in this scope, we are then sharing these elements, especially when it comes to self-production, self-management. We also share the values of orientation towards human needs and also the contribution to commitment with the community. But there were two other questions or fields where I think we should explore a bit more. One would be governance in the global project. How is this self-organization or this participation in the democratic participation beyond participation by the stakeholders in the production of the service itself? And we could here think of how to would define the strategies for the future in their projects, or up to which extent do we want these elements to generate an economic profit or not? How do we want to relate to each other? Do we want to set ourselves a limit for growth or not? How do we decide on this? How we participate? And the second question mark for me would be the application of the generated value to the system. These would be the two great issues that might have different bases in social and solidarity economy and collaborative economy, and they might be different in the two economies. But if we delve a bit more deeply in each of these three subjects concerning collaborative economy and governance, we should think about the projects of collaborative economy and thinking that deep down we're thinking about a big diversity of projects. They could be very different from each other, but we could actually understand that it's probably true that many stakeholders will be taking part of these projects with inputs, service offerings, and provide with different actors. And concerning democratic participation, the different actors would play different roles in the project. On the other hand, another element that we should bear in mind would be the dimension, scalability of the platforms in terms of governance. And this is where we need to think about how we can have different tools that may help us with this. And the great third issue, not only we're building different models from cooperativism, examples such as Som Energia COP57 are clear examples that are building their own models. And they are not finished, but in general, those who get closer to collaborative economy, it's also a great opportunity for them to move on to assess the value for the community, the social value of the project. And so which tools can we make use of? The platform will help us carry out this participative governance and democratic participation. These elements will be helping for the preparation of the ownership of the project. Co-ownership might be interesting in the sense that the actors participating in the project might feel that they are part of the project. They feel they are part of it, and this ownership is what gives them the sense of motivation to take the project till the end, to the very end, and see all the opportunities of collaboration beyond my individual interests of being part of the network. On the other hand, when we're talking about value, within diversity, we can find models that are generating an economic value, but we could understand it in a broad sense, a contribution of knowledge, also economic, in the broad sense, as well as the participation in the projects. They must help make us see the value of the project, how we want it, which value we want it to be, and how we apply the value generated by the project and how we participate in it. We should wonder whether there's another value added and contributed beyond the service itself. If certain services can be considered as part of the pro-common goods and social and solidarity economy, these proposals would be open and would tend to bring a value to the community, so being open, sharing, scalability, etc. If we talk about the cross-sectionality of this dialogue, what are the opportunities for growth in this dialogue? The cooperative, social and solidarity economy, I think, can contribute with forums or dresses or legal dressings, legal forms that might give a forum to a collaborative economy with proposals which are varied. There are different possibilities. It's not the same to talk about a cooperative than to talk about a foundation. A cooperative is probably reinforcing the aspect of democratic management, while a foundation is placing a greater focus on a common heritage in favor of a project. In any case, from the social and solidarity economy, we can find ways to give a forum to collaborative economy projects that might help us and that might invite us to bet for democratic management and to build them from here, that might help us preserve and share this common value, which is to generate new projects. And also, probably, there might not be models that are already built, but they might help us to use old models to help us build the new ones and the projects. I think there are three challenges that we're sharing in these models. Firstly, self-management beyond production. I think collaborative economy, just as it happens in certain aspects of economy, a lot of the people who are there, we are not trying to participate in the management beyond the provision of the service. So how do we work the preparation, the training, the motivation, and our dedication so that we will participate in the self-management, how to structure it, how to strengthen it? On the other hand, efficiency. Collective management demands time. I think this is what we're facing every day on a day-to-day basis in collaborative economy. We need resources in the broader sense of the word. They do require time and resources, and this will mean that we need to have a maximum efficiency with our resources so that our project will be sustainable. Thirdly, so the efficiency would be the second aspect, and the third one would be the dimension, with the participation of the different actors and the decision-making, which will be collective. And we're talking about thousands of people throughout the territory with different and diverse interests or opinions. To close my presentation, a reflection by Marguerite Mendel. She said this in the framework of a conference in Barcelona in October 2015, speaking about cooperativism and university. She said, social economy should not be perceived and as a historic antecedent of the exchange, collaboration, and cohesion, but rather as the model of organization for new initiatives for collaboration, as a model to institutionalize this collective identity. Up to which extent is collaborative economy, or at least in Catalonia, could the collaborative economy be the answer to these collaborative projects? It has many elements that could be useful, but others we might have to keep on developing. And nowadays, maybe they're not quite ready. For example, if we speak of collaborative economies, common economies, in the field of the relationship between the private and the public sectors, the legal formulas in place today are not giving final answers yet. They're not covering everything that we need. Whereas in the cooperative and social and solidarity economy, we have it's more covered. And in the area of financing, we need to take some more steps forwards. However, we have a good base to start working from for democratic participation, democratic and participative management, to give more value and more strength to the community and to this new economy. And this is all I have to say. Thank you.
Bé, gràcies per convidar-nos. Jo us parlaré.
Thank you for inviting us. So we were introduced with. We have been introduced to the topic of cooperativism, but we are going to talk about a specific case. I am going to be quick because there are more slides. Some of them are just references. You won't have time to read everything. But I would like to explain two things: how we get organized and what are the aims of... So what are the recommendations of the policies we want to carry out? So about ourselves, we are from the telecommunications domain and social organization. For us, we have our own network, and technicians don't manage social structures or social rules. So this is what we were trying to avoid. But now we have been working for 15 years, and even if it was very tough, we realized that beyond the circle of friends, when the thing gets bigger and there is a certain volume and there is a growth of 100%, we have to get organized, and this is what we are trying to do. So there are investments of more than €1 million with crowdfunding, and we are adapting the functions. We are in telecommunications, and this comes from studies that were carried out about the industry, about the business models, and we can depict this with integrated models from monopolies, and there were neutrality forms, more or less open, more or less neutral, but there is always the risk of controlling the tap from the other. There was no business model, and this is what we are introducing now. We want to give space to communities, to environments beyond the community. So this is where we come from, and professionals, freelancers that can commit, cooperatives, associations, and to do it, we had to invent a new model with those commons. We wanted all the stakeholders to participate. If we didn't create the commons, this was not feasible. What we had to do to connect from the rural areas through radio and fiber to the territory. In the case of Catalonia, we have a lot of rural areas, and we had to resell the connections to the operators. So, and this was bottles struggle. And this was what we had to articulate with time. So we had volunteers, we are occupying public domains, and there are some inconveniences. If public administrations are not smart, we have nothing to do, and we have to develop a partnership, and there are different ways of doing it, and they all work. So you have small companies, you have freelancers and associations who do the work. There are many people. So in our case, we did a foundation because you need rules of the game. Otherwise, the big fish wants to eat the small one. So this can happen at a smaller scale in our ecosystem, and we have to get an organization to solve those problems, and it has to be open, participative, a little bit what we have seen. We have a foundation, and there is all this ecosystem working. The definition of democracy is always difficult. There is often a debate. So we want to avoid the big fish eating the small one. So sometimes what we do is we have meetings every month, and we ask the community to see what are the concerns, proposals. So we know that consensus is not always possible. So you don't want a majority of shares to destroy the commons. So here, very briefly, we have to apply governance, otherwise it will be like in a tragedy. And if you have a pasture, of course there will be someone who wants to put more cows on the field. So we want to solve this, to give sustainability, and we do things as general criteria. So this is what we do with the trade-off meetings. So it is a model asymmetric, respect the consumption. There are people who contribute, people who don't contribute, and they only have economic activity. And then there is a trade-off. Otherwise, the one who contributed the most is the one who benefited the most. So he contributed with 30, but he's consuming 45. And Another one contributed with 25, but he was consuming 10. So he has to get a return. So it's a balance. And we are applying this at 3 levels, at the level of the territory, because otherwise in the city everything would be cheaper than in the rural areas. I am going to conclude with this. It is possible in telecommunications, even if it doesn't exist. It is important to create a system of governance. So it's a little bit weird, but this is so in telecommunications. There are other fields in economy that apply this. It is disruptive, so the industry doesn't like it at all because it changes the rules of the game. And we put the value to the distributor of the connection, and the rest is cost oriented. So it can be efficient, it can be sustainable, and it is very important for rural areas, because people thought that this was impossible. We don't need public funding, it is not necessary. So they are welcome if they come, and we still have a lot of things to learn. And in order to summarize, we agree with the European Union, and even in small municipalities, everybody wants the internet for everyone. And what is important is when they develop their own policies, if we have to do something, we always outline that we need space in order to function in a sector as ours. There are 50,000 ways of blocking any production that is not friendly with the traditional one. And in order to do so, what we wanted to explain, yes, the administrations, the authorities know this. They always identify two uses: self-service, because they need connectivity for cameras, for traffic lights, and the private use. So this sector was privatized. So it is so they have assimilated all this. So it is important to understand that there is a third way. Infrastructures should be shared. It is very simple. Optic fiber cable can have all the internet in Catalonia. The only thing is to manage it well. The industry doesn't like it, but this is possible. So we don't have to kill the other uses. A municipality can share the network with the citizens, and we don't deny the possibility of this, of shared uses. There are many ways of deploying this. There can be a universal criterion, and this is what would happen with fiber when resource lacks or is depleted. So there is a signal that is shared, and if there is not a new company, you have to open. But this is not necessary in the case of telecommunications, and this criterion can be extrapolated. So at the beginning, we were talking about things that are not fulfilled, and simply so you have to take those things into account, because otherwise there will never be equality. Something weird is happening, and you need candidates, for instance, from the other gender. So we have to be secure, be sure about the option. The option of commons should be compatible. If there is no possibility to share the infrastructure, so this is a problem from the start. So I am going to give the floor to Dimitri.
Cool. I just want to start with this very famous quote from Lucy Parsons: "Never be deceived that the rich will permit you to vote away their wealth." Lucy Parsons was quite an amazing activist in the anarchist communist community, and I think this is really quite important, that the change comes from struggle. It doesn't come from proposals. It doesn't come from things that would just simply work better if only everybody got on board. It comes from conflict and making things actually really happen. So we can kind of paraphrase that as never be deceived that the capitalists will permit us to code away their wealth, right? So when we're building like alternative platforms and thinking about alternative platforms, we need to understand that ours is a political challenge as well as a technical challenge. There's political forces that we have to understand and engage with. That it's not just a matter of how the code works, how the software works. We have to address both. So I'm Dimitri Kleiner from Telekommunisten, which is an arts collective based in Berlin, and we do work that investigates the political economy of information technologies. Sometimes I show some of the work, but I've only got 10 minutes, so no time for that. You'll have to find it out on your own. So we're going to go through a bit of the lexicon of Telekommunisten and how we address some of these issues, which is where these made-up words come from that the translator is going to hate me for. So to start off with, we'd like to start from the point of view of consent and thinking about consensual systems. There's a lot of talk about privacy these days and security and stuff like that, but actually what people really want is consent. It's not so much privacy that they want, it's they want to consent. Sometimes they may want to be very promiscuous in my information, but I want to be in charge. I want to be able to decide what I'm sharing with whom and when, right? And so the key feature that we need to think about is consent, not actually privacy and security directly. Although consent requires privacy. We cannot engineer systems that can deliver consent unless those systems can be private as well, because they have to give me the choice of what I control. And privacy, as it turns out, and we'll explain this a little bit more, requires something that we've come to call counter-anti-disintermediation. You got time for the translation of that? Counter-anti-disintermediation. And that itself requires venture communism. Because counter-anti-disintermediation requires creating systems that are not centrally controlled, where there's no ability for platforms to control user data and user interaction, which also prevents them from making profit. So in order to build such systems, we need other ways to build them that aren't based on the accumulation of profit, and we call this broadly venture communism. And venture communism itself requires transvestment, and transvestment we define as a transfer of value from one mode of production to another. So investment we think of as something that an investor can do that enriches both the investor and the mode of production that they're engaging in, right? Exvestment is something that may enrich the investor but does not enrich their mode of production, goes into another form of mode of production. And transvestment is the balance of those two, kind of like the balance of trade in an economy between import and export. So you can think of transvestment as import of value into the commons, right? And transvestment requires technological disobedience, because the industry as it is, all the stuff, all the equipment and things that are being produced by the industry are produced for the interests of capital and are produced for the capitalists. So in order to build systems that do something other than promote the interests of capitals, we have to use these systems in different ways, and we have to use them often longer than they were intended to be used, and in ways that are not the way they were intended to be used by industries that produce them. And in order to give us the space, the personal space to do this, we have to engage in what we call counter-politics, which is engaging in existing institutions, defending rights, defending benefits, giving us the ability to create alternative forms. Right, so here's those funny terms again for the benefit of the translators. Counter, anti, disintermediationism, venture communism, transvestment, technological disobedience, and counter-politics. Right? So what do we mean by these? So disintermediation, in the 90s, some of you may remember, probably you and me here at least, we thought that everything would be disintermediated, that the internet meant a whole new era of society because we had finally a network that would enable us to communicate as peers. So everything was going to be disintermediated. We were going to not have banks and states and countries and things anymore. We were going to have distributed networks, peer-to-peer networks, commonses and things like that, that were going to completely replace all existing hierarchical, social, and territorially bounded institutions. But that didn't happen, right? Even though we really thought it would. And the reason why it didn't happen was because, as it turns out, there's a lot of really powerful invested interests in maintaining these institutions and maintaining this sorts of mediation. And they successfully undertook a strategy of anti-disintermediation. So they, through applying their wealth and influence, were able to resist disintermediation, right? So now we can't merely talk about we can't really talk about disintermediation. We need to think about how to resist these strategies. So we need counter anti-disintermediation. And one of the core principles of disintermediation is the end-to-end principle, right? So one of the things that was animating a lot of the excitement about the internet technology and why we were believing that this new platform would really change everything is because of the end-to-end principle. And the end-to-end principle means designing things in a way where all the functionality of the system resides in the end nodes, meaning your computer, the one actually right in front of you, and not anything in the middle. So no servers in the middle, nothing in the middle. Everything was supposed to be end-to-end. And this has a lot of really important engineering features. If you're going to design systems that are privacy-respecting, censorship-resisting, and scalable, they must be However, the anti-disintermediationists didn't think of it this way, right? Because profit requires centralization. For platforms to earn profit, they need to control user interaction and user data because that is what their business models are based upon, right? So centralized venture capitalist platforms emerged and started to replace the disintermediating platforms of the internet. So things like Usenet became replaced with things like Facebook, and other kinds of platforms emerged that were central. And the reason they emerged was not because they were better engineered or because they were more useful. Well, it's because they better served the interests of capital. They made it possible for capital to capture profit. Right, here's a quote from Hal Varian, the chief economist of Google, where he talks about the importance of lock-in. Right, so the basis of capitalist platforms is the capture of users, as Hal helpfully explains here. He wrote a book long before he joined Google, maybe even before Google existed, called Information Rules, which is very influential in anti-disintermediation thinking. Right? Let's just talk about that a little bit further. So, if you think about the business models of these central venture capitalist platforms, right? I think the previous panel kind of already talked about that a little bit, where the idea is that within media, it's not the media that's being sold. The media is not the product. The product is the audience of media, and the customer of media is not the person consuming the media, but the advertisers and such that are buying the audience. So when you're using Facebook, you're not Facebook's product. Facebook's product is advertising. It's an advertising platform. So their real customers, the people that are buying those advertising, and why they're buying advertising is because they want to advertise to you. So what they're buying is behavioral control, right? And so Facebook is selling you as its product or as its commodity. And commodities are always sold by grade and measure. Whether you're buying eggs or apples or milk, you're always buying a certain amount of a certain grade. So to sell commodity, you have to grade it. right? So an advertiser doesn't buy just 2,000 impressions. They buy 2,000 impressions from white males who have jobs and credit cards, right? So in order to grade their audience commodity, they have to spy on you. They have to provide surveillance in order to grade audience commodity to sell it. So this is why these kinds of platforms have to be centralized, because their business model is the sale of audience commodity, right? And so they need lock-in, right? So in order to kind of overcome these kinds of things, if we're trying to build alternative platforms, we can't build cargo-called platforms. We can't say, hey, look, there's Facebook. Wouldn't it be great if we had a Facebook, but it's open source, or it doesn't sell your data, or it's or they cut you in, or it's like the same as Facebook but something else, right? We have to look much deeper than that, and how we design and engineer systems that are going to resist the anti-disintermediationists, because the federated groupware model, that was the original model of the internet, right? So if federated groupware, like Usenet or like Statusnet or like Diaspora, if that model was able to resist anti-disintermediation, it would already have. The strategy of anti-disintermediation was specifically designed to overcome those platforms. So they already defeated federated groupware. So federated groupware is not going to then come around and defeat them, right? So, and the reason that this kind of federated groupware doesn't really solve the problem is it doesn't address the fundamental problem, which is capitalism, right? The fundamental problem is capitalism, and I think you also mentioned that that if we're going to really build alternative systems, we need to think about how our productive capacities are spent, and like if we're building our communication capacity for social value or for profit. And of course, there's even a bigger problem, because when we're talking about technology and technological inputs, we have to understand this. The technological supply chain consists of colonialism, war, exploitation, and poison, right? So like anything that increases our use of technology is inherently environmentally, politically harmful. So this is another strong challenge that we have to address, is that every microchip is made out of blood. Right, so venture communism is, in very many ways, we talk about it like as if it's cooperatives, and it sounds very, very compatible, but there's a few kind of core things, right? So a venture commune needs to be federated, right? It needs to be built on transvestment. It needs to employ technological disobedience. It needs to build counter anti-disintermediationist platforms, and that it needs to apply their economic power towards counter politics, right? So cargo call platforms are impossible, right? Because more users mean more resources. So the reason that federated groupware was so easily defeated by the theories of Halvarian and others was because even if you have many servers, even if you have a distributed federated sense, those servers still require upkeep. They require administrators, they require resources, so they cost money. And the more users they have, the more money they cost. So it actually makes it very difficult for these platforms to grow, because the servers require money, require resources, right? Whereas in end-to-end systems, right? End-to-end systems do not have a completely different scaling platform. So with an end-to-end system, the more users you have, the more capacity you have, because the actual systems are built based on the resources of the computers already in your possession. So you already have a computer right in front of you. It already has a CPU. It already has disk space. It already has RAM. It already has a network, right? And so when you're using end-to-end systems, truly distributed systems, then the scalability works completely differently than when you're working federated systems. And the most important difference is that every additional user makes the network resources grow, not drains them. Right? This is a very key difference to understand how a platform can scale. So when they're end-to-end, they become scalable and they become sustainable. So counter anti-disintermediation means no servers, no admins. Right? So the system should not have any servers, and it should not have any administrators. The only software that should be running is the software that's running on your own computer, and everything in the middle should be network ciphertext, and that's all. And the venture communism, the structure of the organizations that run these systems also need to have also need to have certain criteria, right? They obviously need to be cooperative, but they also need to be federated, because individual cooperatives can have power imbalances against each other, right? Can have power relationships among each other. So in order for cooperatives to really have a positive influence on distribution of wealth and power, they have to be themselves be federated. They have to work together, and they have to share ownership of the key assets. So they have to be commons-based, right? So the productive assets have to be held in common, and they have to be open. So all workers that work on them have to be entitled to membership. They can't be allowed to themselves exploit outside labor, right? So the cooperative itself has to provide a path to ownership for all the people that it employs. Right, so investment, ex-investment, trans-investment, we covered that a bit in the beginning. So just to review that again, if you're looking at the economy as a macroeconomy, right? A lot of people kind of follow this sort of classical, you could say Leninist kind of like social trajectory of like, first we had feudalism, then the capitalists overthrew the feudalism, and then we had capitalism, and then sometime in the future the workers will rise up and overthrow the capitalists. And then they'll smash the bourgeois state, and they'll build the worker state, and then we'll have socialism, and then after a while, social relationships will change, and the worker state will wither away, and then we'll have communism, right? You've seen variations of that kind of trajectory many times. But actually, if you think in a macroeconomic sense, you understand that modes of productions are always happening. So every mode of production that's possible is happening, and they're happening at the same time. So we've always had feudalism, capitalism, communism, socialism, and every other mode of production that's imaginable, always at the same time. So in our day-to-day lives right now, there are certain interactions, certain forms of producing and sharing that we do under capitalist terms, certain ones that we do under communist terms, certain ones that we do under socialist terms. And in the case of intellectual property and your apartment, feudalism is also alive and well and highly persisting, right? So you have to think multimodally. You have to think about what modes are happening and what's the structure of modes in the economy, not what mode do we only have, right? And if you think about it that way, then you can think of value going between modes in the same way that you think of trade going between countries. So you can think of export and import sort of modes. And what makes one mode grow relative to another is what we call transvestment. So investment is a form of investment of a player in a mode that benefits them and the mode and grows the mode. Exvestment is a form that may benefit them but goes outside the mode, so grows a different mode. And transvestment is that balance, right? So here's a lovely illustration of transvestment going into the commons from the outside capitalist economy. And I think that's a very, very helpful way of understanding the transition. So when you think about revolutions, right? Revolutions don't happen when one mode ends and another begins, right? Revolutions happen when one mode challenges the dominance of another mode, right? So the capitalists could not have become the dominant mode of production if they only invented capitalism after the bourgeois revolution, right? There had to be an existing capitalism in order for the bourgeois revolution to take place. And so thinking multimodally helps you understand that we have to build the commons movement, and we have to build kind of the worker state in the shell of the old, to use the terms of the IWW, right? So, and then back to technological disobedience. In doing this as technologists, we have to use technology in ways that are not necessarily following the interests of the industries and organizations that made them. So this term is coined by Ernesto Arenzo. He's a Cuban artist, and he has a lovely body of work that he's collected the various ways that Cubans use technology, because in Cuba there's been an embargo for multiple decades, and so technology is very difficult to come by inside of Cuba. And so the Cubans have had to be very creative in how they use technology. So they use like parts of washing machines to fix motors, and they use things in very different and interesting ways, right? And that are much longer and use them much longer than they were intended, right? And so we have to think that same way. We have to not, like, the real innovation is not at the front of the consumer electronic life cycle. Real innovation is not using whatever is being sold by Silicon Valley today. Real innovation is figuring out how to use the technology whose next stop is the recycling truck, right? Who's heading to the aftermarket, right? So this is the area where we need to focus on if we want to really build a large-scale, sustainable movement, because we can't limit our movement to just the sort of like wealthy people that can own that can have the latest iPhones or whatever, right? We need to be able to we need to be able to focus innovation on the parts of the production cycle that are towards the end of the cycle. Equipment whose next stop is the recycling bin, because we don't want it to be recycled. There's a lot of value, a lot of wealth. Every single cell phone has a tremendous amount of human value invested in it. Like, there's been wars, environmental catastrophes, labor exploitation, and all sorts of other things that have made any cell phone exist. And to throw it away means that we've lost all that value that's already been created. And so it's much more radical to try to keep that into production than to be interested in what the latest thing being sold by the market is. So the enterprises within the commune must be technologically disobedient and disintermediationist, or they will fail or be integrated with capitalism. And then the final thing, and possibly the most important thing, is that the venture commune must direct its economic power towards counter-politics, or it will fail to confront capitalism. One of the biggest weaknesses of the cooperative movement, besides not being federated, is that it's often apolitical. It often takes care of its own members, but doesn't actually use its economic power to fight for social justice more broadly for other workers, right? And so for it to make a real difference, it has to be able to direct the economic power it creates towards counter-politics. And the reason I say counter-politics and not politics proper is the distinction is that politics proper is this, again, more kind of Leninist idea of we'll take the state, and from the power of the state, we'll impose the new society from the top down, where I actually, I think that's a very questionable and probably impossible from the macroeconomic point of view to make happen, because that implies that there's some preformed thing that has the capacity to impose a new mode of production on society. If you think multimodally, then you understand that actually the new mode always emerges from the ground up, but only contests power when it's evolved to a certain point. So counterpolitics means confronting existing social institutions to protect social conditions. So supporting struggles to win and protect rights to health, housing, food, water, education, childcare, etc., because we need these conditions to build revolutionary alternatives. Our ability to experiment with different technologies, different communities, our ability to do other things is dependent on maintaining and protecting the conditions that we have as workers. So this sort of age-old conflict between reform and revolution, where there's an apparent conflict between people that want to reform the current society and people that want to build a completely new alternative society. This is kind of like an overly simplistic idea. It's a false dilemma, because actually we need to do both. We need to work on creating new bottom-up forms, while at the same time fighting in the existing institutions to protect our ability to do so, to protect the benefits and rights that we have. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri and Ramón. Bueno, ahora es el momento de las preguntas. No sé si...
It's the time for questions. We've got 15 minutes for questions and answers. I think many interesting topics have come up, and I'm sure you've got comments or questions on these different business models around technology that have been presented, and how also we've heard about social and cooperative economy and how it has a relationship with pro-common collaborative economy. And I think Dimitri's presentation was very challenging on how we need to tackle this collaborative economy. I think it was quite challenging in the sense that we are not politically organized, maybe, sufficiently in our pro-common initiatives.
All right, I just tried to talk loud.
Now it's good.
It is.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Dimitri, for one of the best presentations I've heard at a conference so far. And thank you, all of you, anyways. Okay, I've got two little points. I see you call yourself Telekommunisten and you use the word venture communists or venture communism. Just my feeling is that by using that word communism without any relationship to the content, you might scare away about 90% of the population. So just as a comment. But the other point was that when you described the this venture communist model, you mentioned it should be open, but then you said open to all workers. Why don't you say stakeholders? Because there are other stakeholders affected by businesses, any types of businesses, and why shouldn't they have a say too? And then, yeah, my question would be, what is the strategy? You were criticizing this kind of copy approach where we copy the standard platform or whatever model or product that is provided by Google, Facebook, and so on, and then make it a co-op or make it open source. You criticized that because you said, okay, it's not gonna break through. What is the strategy that you propose that you think will actually lead to win the conflict that you were describing? Thanks.
It's a lot of questions. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll try to go through them fast. On the communism angle, of course, this is not the first time we've got that feedback. I come from Canada, which is somewhere near the United States of America, where communism is actually a really offensive term, and so I chose this term very self-consciously because I think this anti-communism freezes the discourse, and the inability to make reference to the academic history of political thought actually makes it really impossible to have this conversation. So I very self-consciously chose that word in order to directly confront that kind of anti-communism, and that's more important to me than being popular, because I don't really see what I do as speaking to the masses, so to speak. It's more embedded in the hacker community and the arts community, and so we're as artists we're allowed to take a more provocative stance. In terms of the what are the differences? So the cargo cult platforms that I'm talking about are specifically because they're just federated groupware. So they're not counter anti-disintermediationist, they're not technologically disobedient, they're not all these other things. So we need not only to just say this is Facebook but it's open source. We need to understand that it needs to be end to end. It needs to be all of the other things that we listed, the counter anti-disinformationist, technologically disobedient, and counter-political, right? Is only in concert can it really make a difference. If you don't do all of these things, then you will fall prey to the already existing anti-disintermediationist strategies that economists like Hal Varian have already successfully developed and deployed, as Google is a prime example of, to kill the original internet.
Hello. My question is to you, Dimitri, again. And I don't have technical skills. I'm not a hacker. What can people like me can do in your context, in your way to understand this fight?
First of all, I think that too much emphasis is placed on like being a software developer. I think being an enthusiastic and informed user of free software and alternative platforms is also a huge contribution. So I think it obviously takes some effort, but as they say, everything worthwhile does. So I think being a user and being part of the communities is a really important role to play. And there's a lot more to be done than coding. Coding is really only a small part of what needs to be done.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I arrived a little bit late, so I couldn't see the whole of the introduction that you made. My question is, we held some sort of like a short debate maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and we share a fest that we hold in Barcelona, somehow inviting from the collaborative economy to speak with social and solidarity economy. And from that sort of dialogue, five, we call it like meeting points, but it could be understood as acupuncture points or leverage points emerge, I think, and this is just on the fly. I think it was one that was like the productive citizen, that the change is systemic, that we're trying to change the values towards like culturally, or the hegemony of the change into the values from the individual to the core. The change in legislation, and to change how we relate to capital. That's just like, from the collective intelligence, that's what it came. But to me, it's always like, there's this reflection on that what we're trying to do is like a pretty big shit, like in the sense, like it's systemic change. And I wonder if there's any of the players that are behind this thing that are taking this systemic approach to understand, like, okay, what are the leverage points that we need to tackle to actually make all this change happen? Because of course it can happen like pretty organically as capitalism. Nobody actually see it and said, let's design capitalism and what's going to be the leverage points to do that. But right now we have a much more rich understanding of how complex systems work, and we have this goal to actually change the system. So I wonder if this is any effort onto more like systemic approaches to make this change happen.
Was that a question or just a comment? I mean, we certainly need more systemic thinking. Sometimes we joke that we need less action and more talk, because often things that are presented as solutions are immediately embraced without actually asking the question of, are these actually solutions? And this is not only a waste of time, but it actually takes oxygen away from other projects and directions, which may have been more fruitful if we had the patience to think more thoroughly about a specific topic. So I'm not trying to encourage inaction, but I definitely do agree that we need to think more systemically and really understand things on a deep level.
Les coses des d'una comprensió profunda.
Ho podria fer en anglès, però no sé si m'entendré.
I don't think you would understand my English. My question, I don't know, it's a comment or a question. Who is the subject? The Wi-Fi.net subject. I am the Horta Carmel Wi-Fi Net platform. In Horta Carmel Wi-Fi Net works like in Spain, the airport in Spain. We've got lots of nodes, but no traffic. Who is the subject? My impression that we are convinced that we have tried time and again that our neighbors and our organizations are part of Wi-Fi.net, and in the end, it's not there. No, we can't convince them. We even do the training to them. We even put the antenna for free. We show them, and it's not working. And they're not listening. They're not. And the same question for Dimitri: who is the subject who will take a computer and become part of a new network such as Wi-Fi Net? I started up a cooperative for real estate administration, and I would like each house to have their own server and antenna. So to decentralize server, one per community, and that would be my dream. But I'm talking to people all day long, without being too charging, but try to talk about it all the time, and everything that sounds like a common to our society, it scares people to death. Do I have to share this? How many millions are you asking me to do the opposite? The people are really scared of sharing. Can we jump over this obstacle? Can we overcome this obstacle, do you think? Should I start? Yes, we must be clear about this concerning something like Wi-Fi.net. Precisely, especially these are citizens who will make it possible, and the commons network that we will build. I come from a part of Wi-Fi.net, and you come from a different part of Wi-Fi.net, of one same project, because somebody has to come up with a foundation and do the arbitrations and do the. But Wi-Fi.net is not the foundation. The day we lose these perspectives, we are finished. Although we are undergoing transformation and change, and we're developing new systems all the time, We must never lose sight of a reference. It's a citizen network, and we must make it our own. You are in Horta Carmel, are you? The district? The day you don't have Wi-Fi.net in Horta Carmel anymore, it won't be the Gore people doing the Horta Carmel Wi-Fi net. So it must be the people there working for it. Each ecosystem that's being developed in each habitat. There's a lot of discussion with this, and mainly with the rural areas. We also have deficits in the cities, not only in the rural areas, because it's an argument we hear often. Other experiences, like the experience in Athens, the metropolitan experience in Athens, shows that there are a lot of external factors that are having influence on these experiences. That's why I said there we have three legs. One leg is the citizens. If there's no collaboration with the administrations, the habitat will be very difficult, the urban habitat, because we've got radio and other physical obstacles. How do you occupy the streets? How do you throw antennas and cables? So that might be an obstacle, or that might be also something we can work on. The advantage of the city is that we have do-it-yourself philosophy. Some people like the do-it-yourself philosophy. So it's not just for rural areas. We are aiming at urban areas as well. Each habitat will have its own difficulties, but it's very important to collaborate with administrations. Now we're trying to work with the city council to see if we can do something with them, because we come from very different worlds. Public administration, and the bigger it is, it's not so easy to welcome initiatives from citizens. But we're trying. So the subject is the network of commons from the citizens, and then we've got the cooperatives and the associations. But Wi-Fi.net has as a main subject the commons. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Have I answered your question? Maybe a short answer on that.
I mean, if I understand Wi-Fi correctly, and it's a project I've known about for a long time, it's one of the greatest community Wi-Fi networks, the most influential, and I think it sounds like you're exactly the subject, like self-organized buildings that want to create a cooperative network.
Yeah, in essence, he was saying that the most important is although you are just participating in a community, although maybe you are not contributing so much, but just because of participation, that's the main, let's say the main subject of any community itself. So just being part, it's actually the main point. The rest, I mean, for having 100 people in the community, maybe 10 are trying to contribute. The others will also like to, but don't do because they don't have time, they don't have skills. And the other next things that will happen is that only one of those 10 will contribute with something useful. That's typical in any community, right? So we have to be thousands and even tens of thousands for really create a critical mass of contributors. And so it doesn't matter if you don't contribute so much, or in Carmel that is not, but just being part of that is already appreciated. And in a community, what's the most important? To have members, right? So. Estem fora de temps.
Estem ja fora de temps, dels 15 minuts de més que tenim. L'última pregunta i... Please. A question for Ramon Roca. Are you working with other cooperatives, with other projects with a social focus, like some energy or some Connexió? I'm following you, and maybe I'm missing that leverage within projects, and that might cause lots of synergies. I would encourage you to do that. Well, I am a member of Som Energia. Some of the initiatives on cooperatives also are coming from the other worlds. We don't come from the cooperative world ourselves. We come from the freaky world, if you want to call it like that. It's one of our challenges, and you're right. We have got a long way to go. Very well. I'm sorry we must finish. It's been very interesting. I guess if you want to be in touch with any of the speakers, you can ask them for more information during the coffee break, and I'm sure they will be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you all. And we'll see you in 20 minutes.